Good morning. So we've concluded Ayin Beis. However, we're learning the background and text source material in the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer to help us understand better the Ayin Beis themes, and especially being that the Rebbe Rashab did not conclude writing it. So we're piecing together the pieces from these Maimer. So where we are is the Maimer Mika Hashem Elokeinu, actually a Chanukah Maimer, a Makbil L'Sheves. We learned it in the Alter Rebbe's Maimer and Beer explanation, and now we're learning it Mittler Rebbe, and we're on page 364. 364. So let's sum up what we've been learning, where we're at. So it's all around right now. We're talking about Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, that the soul of a human being is the Ner Hashem, is a Ner of God. And why is it a Ner? Because it consists of several components. There's the wick, there's the divine soul, is the wick. There's the oil, which is the animal soul, which the entire purpose of the divine soul coming down below is to transform that animal soul's intelligence and being into oil, fuel, that will in turn create Eish, the fire, the divine love. So, but he asked a question, which is the question from, in different words, what he said in Teireh. The question was, Lahavin, he says, let's just read the actual question just a second. From where does the soul have power to transform the nature, the natural selfishness of the natural soul, which is the Yetzer Hara, which was born that way, it's created that way. That's called Yetzer Hara. So the way he phrases it is, from where does it have that power? In Teireh, the language is more, how do you transform it? And Ayin Beis, he combines both elements. How do you do it? And how does the neshama, why the neshama has the power to do so? So to answer that, he began by saying that, why is it called Yetzer Hara? Yetzer Tev, Yetzer from the word Yetzira, because it's shaped from its source that way. In other words, it didn't happen at the end of the process. Both the Yetzer Tev and the Yetzer Hara, these two inclinations, are rooted in two places. Based on that root, that's how they've been shaped. That's the Yetzer, the Yetzira, or the Bria, as he said. And what are the two sources? Emek Tev and Emek Ra. Now, Emek means depth, but Emek also means the source. You say the Emek of something, but Emek, like we say, in the depths of the earth sprung water, or in the depths of the earth something else comes. It's coming, in other words, from the inner depths, the inner source. So Emek Ra Tev is the source of the Yetzer Tev. Emek Ra is Mokar Amel the Mamshel Haradi Yetzer Hara. What he called Kisin the Masavusa, the impure crowns, Makif. Okay, Zelo Mazeh. And to explain this, he began to explain the verse that says, Ruach HaAdam Eil L'maylo. That's referring to the Nefesh Elikis. That's Eil L'maylo, goes upward, reaches up. And Ruach HaBehema, of the animal soul, goes downward. But we haven't gotten to the animal soul yet. So he started explaining what the divine soul is. The Koyach HaAtzmi Shem Neshama K'moishu L'maylo. That's Emek Tev. So the neshama, because it comes from that place, so it gravitates to it. It's drawn to that. For the Zayar, he brought Keich Kadisha, called Keiche. That's where it's drawn from. What he calls the level of Makif of Tselem. Ach B'Tselem Yisalachish. And that's called Yechida Sheba Neshama. Yechida means one is singularity, which is bound and attached and surura and tied consistently with the root of Lai B'Sher HaChaim Be'er Elokim due to its very nature. So the soul's very nature is divine, Elokus. And that's the Ruach HaAdam Shenivra B'Tselem Elokim, And that's why it's Eila Tamid L'shar She'atzmi Mekedi. That soul is constantly longing and always in search and seeking to go back to its source. Because the teva of everything is to return to its source, like a spark that is drawn to the torch, or a candle that, or the light of a candle that goes up to the Eish Yisedi, the source of where fire originates. Same thing with Eira Neshama, the light of the soul, flame of the soul. Even though it manifests within a body and a natural soul below, nevertheless, it always retains that personality that is constantly seeking transcendence. And though there are 5 levels of neshama, nefesh, ruach, neshama, chay, yechida, and we just said yechida is that highest state, so he says yechida is a level where it doesn't, it's not even malubish in ra of klippas nega. Tahirahi, he remains removed. The other levels of the neshama do come down into the soul, into the body, into the existence, and even when it comes down, it's still like yechida. It has the teva musa atzmi is kamei b'chinas yechida. In other words, it does not lose its fiery personality, meaning even though it's a fire that came down into existence, but the fire personality of seeking, like fire rises to go back to its sources on all levels of the soul. So therefore, what do we know from this? That the soul, the divine soul, its very nature is Eila Lamaila, all parts of it. And that's why we see the seichel of the mayach, the seichel of the nefesh alikis, how does the seichel, when the seichel of the nefesh alikis comes down below, even when it comes into our physical being, meaning it's part of your life, but the seichel of nefesh alikis on its own only is drawn to divine understanding. Like he says, to understand godliness and the secrets of the Torah that are called divine wisdom. But every other type of seichel, avos b'seichel v'chachma cheres lo yisugal zeh lahaskel lahavin mu'umah. This of the neshama, of the nefesh alikis, is not capable. It's not in its realm. It's completely not in its domain to try to understand other things that are not divine. It only conceives and understands and comprehends things that are related to its source. And where is its source? We said Emek Tev, all the way in Yechid in the source. To the point that you don't call this a nefesh hamaskelis, an intellectual soul or cognitive soul, only in the context of seichel eliki. When you talk about nefesh hasiklis in general, it could be seichel in Torah, in godly matters. It could have also seichel in scientific matters, mathematics, astronomy. Here we're talking getlach, as he says in Yiddish. It's godly. Uberuach elikim mamish v'lo shum seichel v'das achar zulase. And it's all this, the Beruach Halikim, like you said, the Ruach Adam Elamad, the Ruach Halikim, spirit of the divine, and there's no other seichel except the seichel Haliki. So in other words, if we did not have an animal soul, we did not have a natural soul that is involved in human intelligence on an existential level, only the divine soul would only be involved in godly matters. To put it in maybe a simpler English, understand what that means. I gave an example a number of times. You're building a building, let's say, a structure. Say it was also used example with the artist and art. So the people building the building, the contractors, and all the different skilled workers, whether it's the electricians or the plumbers or the bricklayers or whatever it is, they're involved in the wisdom that's necessary in building the building. What does the Nefesh Halikis see? Like the architect, he is not involved in the technical building. He's involved in the vision of why we're building this building. Like Moshe Rabbeinu told B'Tzalel, build a Mishkan. And he began by saying the Kalim, the Aron, the Menorah, and so on. And then he talked about the structure. So Bezalel asked Moshe, it's not the order. First you build the structure, then you bring in the furniture, the kelim, the vessels. And Moshe agreed. So the Chassidus explains, Moshe was a visionary. He's not focused on the technical structure. He's not the builder. He's the vision, the divine vision. What is the divine vision? Build for me a sanctuary and I will dwell there. And where does he dwell? In the kelim of the Mishkan. When you come to the technical part, in order to build a Mishkan, of course, first you build the structure. So the Nefesh Elikis sees existence, but it's not involved in the wisdom and the intelligence of science and mathematics. It's interested only in one thing. What does God want in all of this? It's only about godliness. It's the God's intention in it all. The same thing with art. There's the part of the artist that has to know the technique, how to draw something. But we understand that's just him executing it. There's the whole part of how he envisions the art. What's the vision? What's the sentiment? What's the message he wants to convey? What's driving? What's the soul within the art? So Nefesh Elikis is focused on the divine. That's all. That's the Nefesh Elikis. Once it engages with Nefesh Abamis, which we'll learn about, then there's a matter of that interaction that's where the Nefesh Elikis has to influence the Nefesh Abamis. But on its own, so far he's defined what the Nefesh Elikis is. That's Seichel. Seichel Eliki only. And that's where we stopped. So now we continue reading 4 lines from the bottom of page 364. If you're following the pages, and you can follow them easily at ayinbeis.com, all these pages are scanned, PDFs there. You can look at. We also have it on the group. It was posted. And I will continue reading, but I'll stop just in case anybody wants any clarification of what I just summed up, what we learned yesterday. Okay. So let's continue. It's a parenthesis now. Yeah. The parenthesis goes like this. U'keneshamas beloi gufim b'gan Eden. He's to explain this, the way the seichel, the intelligence of the divine soul, like he explained, even as it comes down below, it's consumed only with godliness. So he's going to explain. It's like neshamas without bodies in Gan Eden. So there you have the neshama. Once the neshama comes down below, it's engaged with her body. But there is a scenario where you only have the nefesh elikis on its own. And that, of course, helps us understand what the nefesh elikis is like, so to speak, when it's separate from and not engaged with her body. So souls without bodies in Gan Eden. After a person's Me'eva Esrim Shana, 120 years, so the body remains below, the soul separates, and the soul goes to Gan Eden, which means it's now in a spiritual state of consciousness without its interaction with the physical. What does the soul? What is this? What is their koyach hasoga, their power to comprehend, involved in the chachma bina that they have? It's only in hasoga salikis. It's only in divine comprehension. Shemeir behem b'chinas chachma bina shebemalchus, that radiates within them from chachma bina of malchus of atzilus. Because remember, Gan Eden is in Bria or Yetzirah. So the neshamas of Gan Eden are involved only in godliness. It's coming from chachma bina of malchus of atzilus, and further ad chachma bina d'atzilus atzman. So malchus makes it more that it relates to the neshamas as they are in Biyah. So there's still some form. They are ultimately created entities, but it goes all the way back to chachma bina of atzilus. That's their preoccupation. It's only when the neshama comes down below that it's involved with the material body and animal soul. But as a neshama, so the parentheses just comes to add to help us visualize what it's like an nefesh elikis on its own. Okay. V'zeu shanik neshama, and this is the reason it's called neshama. K'mei shekoshav neshama shadai. Tavinum. Yeah. Which is a pasuk in Mishlei that let me just see what the pasuk says. Let's see. The pasuk is, I think it's 16b. Let me just look it up a second.
It's Eov.
Eov, you say? Not
I think. Wait, I may be wrong.
Mishlei? Well, let's look it up. Whatever it is, it is. You may be right. We'll see. Says Zion base. Okay.
It's Mishnah. It's Mishlei. Sorry, I'm tired. It's Eov. Job 33:4.
33:4?
Yeah.
Okay. Just a moment. $23.4 you said, right?
Yes. 33:4.
33.4. Okay.
I don't see the connection, but you will.
Let's see. The pasuk is brought a number of times in Chassidus, but they interpret it different times. Okay. Let me see here. Give me a moment. Okay, here we are. 33:4. Yeah. Actually, it says here, it's Hayeni.
The Tavi, huh? Actually, maybe that's not right.
Just a second. Let me just look up. Let me see something. Give me a moment.
It's Eov 32:8. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
32.
We're doing a treasure hunt. 32:8?
Correct.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Okay. Ruach be'anish. Spirit of man and the breath of the Almighty. Nishma Shaddai. Okay, so Shaddai, V'nishma Shaddai refers to God's name. So he's talking about the soul of the Almighty, or Nishmas, the breath of the Almighty, they translate. Tavinam allows them to understand. He's bringing the pasuk because he's saying that's why it's called neshama, because neshama is from the word neshima, the breath. Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chaim. God breathed the soul into the person, into the human being. So, being that it's a neshama of Elikis, a divine soul, so tavinam, its understanding is also divine understanding.
It makes them to understand.
Right.
The nishmas.
But how he's teaching it here, right? But he's teaching it here in a way that he's because remember he's talking about this, that the hasaga of the nefesh Elikis is godly. So this posuk, you see the connection to tavinam, the understanding, its discernment, its understanding is coming from Nishma Shaddai. Umishkana. And that's why you find that where does the divine soul rest? He says in Tanya Perek Tes, Mishkana b'meichin shebereish. Because from the pasuk you see, why is he connected to Tavinam? Because just say the soul of God. Why is it Tavinam? Because you see, Seichel is particularly associated with the divine soul, because that's where it resides. B'meich shebereish, b'meichin shebereish, b'meich hachachma, b'meich habina. In the mayach, in the mayach, the mind of Chacham, mind of Bina. Why it says moichin of chachmer bina, because sometimes we talk about the right brain, the left brain, the center brain. So there's different levels of moichin. In general, it's called moichin, intelligence. So where does it reside? In I see below, they take in the Eitz Chaim. I'm sure that's where he says that more specifically. Okay, good. Not sure. Why do they say in this Iyuf? Interesting. Okay. So bottom line is like this. That's just to keep it. Remember the Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe style, it can be sometimes hard because it's almost like, I don't want to use the word run on a Rebbe, but his style is very much, as I said, a free flow. So he goes from one thing to the next, even though the central theme remains the same, but it's not so spelled out. So bottom line is, let's just keep focused. All this has been to demonstrate and explain how the divine soul is completely godly. Ruach ha'adam eila lamayla. And all levels of the soul, even as the soul comes down below. And therefore, the seichel of the nefesh elokis is completely involved only in godly matters, like I gave the example before. Only in godly matters. What he added now is that's not just the seichel. The seichel actually is the primary place where the nefesh elokis resides. Okay. Then he continues. It says like this: in this itself, when we talk about a neshama, divine soul, there are many different levels. It's not like everybody's on the same level. To say the divine soul is divine does not mean everyone's equal in their divine experience. Just like we don't say people are equal in the way they understand things. So he's now explaining Chilukei Madregas, the next page, 365. She'ein kol neshama deim lechaverta. Because no soul is similar to its neighbor, to its colleague, or to its friend. Chaverta means to another. The chaverta b'bnei Adam, to another person among human beings. Zeh masig ba'asogas alikus ba'efen kach. This person understands divine comprehension in this manner. V'zeh masig ba'efen achar. And another person understands it in a different manner. So two people can be learning the same idea. They can be both involved in a godly idea, whether let's say Atzilus, or God's vision, or anything like that.
Okay, so that's beautiful.
And nevertheless, one is different than the other. Kamesha Kosav, v'teichen ruchei savaya. This is the Mishlei that I was referring to. V'teichen ruchei savaya. I assume that the meaning ruches probably loshen rabim. Teichen ruches havaya means that there's different levels of the spirit. Let's look that up. You know what? Let me look that up. Give me a moment. I already was looking at it before. Mishlei 16:2, 16b. Yeah. Always a man are pure in his eyes. Kol darkei ish zog be'enav v'teichen ruches havaya. But the Lord counts the spirits. Interesting. The Teichin. Okay, so I believe the Raya is spirits, plural. So you see that even though they all originate from one place and they're all divine, but they're different levels. Like we see by Matan Torah, by Sinai, there were 600,000 different opinions, or different, I would say, perspectives. What he means by that is the 600,000 neshamas are, even though there are more people than 600,000, but they're the neshamas klolius. That's the number that all souls go into the general category of the central souls of 600,000. Chaluk is b'madrei gosan. So the 600,000 different perspectives, each one their level. Commission kosav ish al digle. When it talks about the camping, the encampments of the shvatim, by in the midbar, it says ish al digli, each person according to his flag. The asis lebeis avesam, with the signs of that identify lebeis avesam, their particular family line. So you see from that wasn't just a technical thing that they came from a different tribe. Each one had their eifan aveda. Each one had their eifan hayidiyah. Like, for example, Chassidus explains the Shevet Ruven is from the word Re'iyah, seeing. Shevet Shimon from the word Shema, hearing, just as an example. So bottom line is that you see from this that there's diversity in this divine experience of souls. The many chilukim madregas. And he continues now and says, Kamoy mesitra de chesed, like those neshamas that come from the side of chesed. I'll just add, the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash has 7 branches. So Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe, Baal Eshkol, Likutei Torah explains this because it corresponds to the 7 categories of souls: Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, all the way through Malchus. So there's the shamas that relate to Chesed. The souls that relate to the side of Chesed, their intelligence and their comprehension. Generally, Seichel and Asag is Chachma and Bina. Just in case you want to know. Often when it's used like together, it's Seichel is Chachma, Maskil, and Bina is Hasaga, Avon of Hasaga. So the Seichel Hasaga Balakus of Chesed is Be'efena Ava v'Chedva Kemachna Mechol. So their manner is Chesed is connected to Ava. So their manner of understanding is in the Kav, and essentially it's with the personality of love and Chedva. Chedva is happiness, joy. Kemachna Mechol. Like the camp of Mechol. Mechol comes from Chesed. Mechol is the Sar Shel Yisrael of Chesed. Gavriel is Gvura, but Machnich Mechol. Ukepnei Aryeh Ela Yamin. Like we find about the Merkava, the Pnei Aryeh, the face of the lion, refers to Chesed as on the right side. Chesed is Yamin. The Hainu, what does that mean? That these neshamas that relate to Chesed, Masha Mispalim, Masagosim Alikisi Chedva Va'ava. Because we're talking about Seichel here. So what does Seichel mean Chesed? So he's saying, explaining that there is bonus, there is Soga, their comprehension, their divine comprehension. How does it manifest itself in a stimulation, excitement, in Chedva and Ava, in joy and love? So he's explaining here, this is definitely an addition from the Mittler Rebbe. You don't find it in Torah at all. The Alter Rebbe's Maimer. He's explaining the differences of how different neshamas experience Elokus. But they're all exclusively Elokus. But it's different kavim. This one's the kav of Chesed and Av and Achva. And Chedva, sorry. B'zeu shenikli b'shem tulda chadosha. Okay, now he's going back, and I need to explain before we read on. But remember earlier he said, the Yetzer Tev, Yetzer Hara, that the Yetzer Tev, it's shaped Tev because it comes from Oimek Tev. But like he explained a little later, it comes from the root and source of Yechida. He called it Tzelem, the Makif, and so on. So the soul, when it comes down below, therefore it channels that Elokus. Now he's saying like this, that is, therefore, impacts the divine soul and impacts its way of understanding, that it's a divine understanding, even as the soul comes down below. But now he's adding that it's not just understanding, it brings a midah, a feeling. Remember I mentioned that Yetzer Tev, Yetzer Hara is usually referred to the midis. Well, let's talk about Yetzer Tev, the midis of the Nefesh L'kis. That's what the Alter Rebbe said in Torah. He said there's the Seichel of Nefesh L'kis, and the Yetzer Tev is the midas that the Seichel gives birth to. Remember, Shema Yisrael, Baruch Shem, that gives birth to V'ahavtas Hashem Elokech. So the goal is not just comprehension. So though he explained how the neshama resides in the mind, and the mind is completely focused on the divine, but now he's going and saying, and that divine mind, when it comes to neshama of Chesed, translates into Hispilus, and gives birth to the midah of Chesed and Ava and Chedva. And he says, and that's called a Tulda Chadosha. That's like a new birthing, because it's not Seichel, it's now a birthing of an emotion. Ki ma shemata sichlam v'asargosim zeh be'etzem mahusam kach. In other words, their mind and comprehension, that is in their very fundamental core, it's a Chesedike type of divine. It's not yet become a midah. So that's how that they are be'etzem mahusam that way. Like when we say, for example, that the neshama of the Hillel relates more to chesed. That's why he was mekel. Shammai's neshama is connected more to gvura. That's why he's machmir. So it means that their seichel, because they came from the different roots, so their seichel, even though both seichels are pitera, but one seichel generally tends to incline toward chesed and one toward gvura. So he's saying, that's how they are in the etzem mahusam, as they're defined, the yitzira of what their shape of their definition of their soul. But that, however, which they excite them with love, that's already a tool to chadosha. That's already something that that was given birth to from the mokir. Shenikra emek tev, like we learned earlier, it's called emek tev. So there's the mokir, and there's how the mokir gives birth to a midah. And how does that happen? That keser, the ha'ara of keser, which is the emek tev in the root, it manifests the reflection of keser and chachma bina sheyalidu hispailas ava, that should give birth to the hispailas, the excitement of ava. So the Mittler Rebbe, again, you see, he starts adding points that really, if you think about it, what we said earlier would be a little easier to structure. But I'm structuring it now. So basically what he's explaining is that the Yetzer Tov of the Nefesh Alikis, the Mides, the way they manifest in Ava, are based on how it originates in the Seichel, but not just in the Seichel. How the Seichel is receiving from the root and the source in Keser. That radiates a Chachma Bina, and that in turn gives birth to a new birthing called a Midah of Ava. Or Hispailis Yira Elikis. He began with Chesed and Ava. Now he's going it could be a neshama that is wired, that originates in Gvura. And that's Yira Elikis.
Can you take a question?
Just a minute. I will always stop for questions. I just want to make sure I pace it properly because remember, I'm teaching here many people, and there's also, for the recording, I want to make sure everything is structured. So I want to see where there's a pause. Good. Let me just see what he says afterwards. Okay. So he's going to be building up now to something. There's a point why the Mittler Rebbe is saying all of this. It's not digressing just to talk about Seichel and Midas. He's going to come back to what he wants to say, make a very important point here, which again is all coming to explain the original concentrated points in the Alter Rebbe's Maimon that we had learned already. I pointed out before a number of times, it's always worthwhile comparing the two. I'm not going to really do that because that itself is very time consuming. But it's definitely worthwhile looking the Alter Rebbe, the way he phrases and how Mittler Rebbe is explaining. But we should always keep in mind the main point here. The main point here is that Nefesh Alikis, in contrast to Nefesh Abamis, is Kulei Elikus. It doesn't understand anything but the divine. As, like he said, like for example, when it's a neshama without a guf, that's all it has. It's made in Chachma Bina in Gan Eden, from Chachma Bina of Malchus or Chachma Bina Atzmai of Atzilus. And now what he added now is that there are different distinctions of how that elikus manifests. There's a chesed, there's a chesed, there's a gvura, ava, yira, and so on. So yeah, I'll stop here before the parentheses and let's stop for any questions.
So just to clarify, my question is he saying here that this is the explanation for the primary nature of different neshamas, like everyone has a neshama that has one more predominant midah, and so he's saying there's essentially seven types of neshamas in terms of what is the primary feature of that neshama. Is that what he's saying?
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I thought he's saying. And I just wanted to confirm.
He said it explicitly. Look at the first line. He says, "The chelukim madrega she'en kol neshama deima lechavata b'bnei adam
Yeah.
This one understands in this way. This one understands in that way. Yeah. Okay.
No, just taking it to really.
Are there any other
Sorry.
questions? Okay. So now, short parentheses. He now says, "Lead spouse ave spouse yira." Okay. Shnikroim b'shem benu bas. So midas in general, if chochma and bina is abba ve'ima, father and mother, that give birth to what? To children. So the children are considered ben and bas, son and daughter, shenilda ma'abba ve'ima, that are born from chochma and bina abba ve'ima, shehu mechudosh mikeich era kesher shenikra mazla. So he's just giving a little, as he did before, a little more other references to this level, which again, Mittler Rebbe does a lot, which also helps us associate with other things we may have learned. In Tanya, Perik Tazayim, which I'm teaching now, he talks about Tfuna, is the letters Ben and Bas. And that's also part of this idea. So Ben and Bas is these midas that give a born from Abba ve'ima, but not just alone, Abba ve'ima. In order to give birth, you need to have a koyach, a higher koyach, and that's mechudosh. The koyach era kesed. That's what we call tul de chadasha. Because Chachma and Bina itself could also not give birth. To give birth, it needs an extra surge, which is usually connected to das. He doesn't mention that here, but in Tanya, Pei the Gimel, he does. The das is iskashus. When you have Chachma, Bina, and then the iskashus, Adam Yodas Chava, they bond together, that gives birth to midas. So the midas are ben and bas, abba ve'ima with the keich mechudesh, and das is eila ada keser, because das is the middle. Again, he doesn't mention that here. I'm just adding for explanation purpose. And he calls Eda Keser Nikra Mazla. It's another level he now gave Mazla. Before he said earlier the Emek Tev, he called it the Tselem Makif. It's all that level, all associated with that level, Mazla, which means a level that hovers above. Okay. Now, the brackets, by the way, are because there are different manuscripts that this mimer is taken from. So when the publisher published it, they compared manuscripts, and sometimes in the manuscript there's another word, and they often put it in a bracket. That's why there's some words have brackets. Kihare onuroyim, because now we see shanefesh hazeh sanikra nefesh alekis. This nefesh that we're talking about, he's not going back to the nefesh alekis that's godly, ketlach. Regardless of which channel or which inclination or which personality it has, chesed, gvura, ava, yira. So he says, could we see that this nefesh, which is called the divine soul, lo yimotzeba, lo yimtzeba, his spilus ava v'yira betmidius. He's explaining now, why are these two steps? Why is it a tul de chadasha? In other words, the seichel gives birth to midas. So he's explaining because you don't find in the seichel of the nefesh alikis, you're not going to find the spalus ava v'yira b'tmidius. You can learn something and understand something godly, and it may not give birth to ava v'yira. Kamoisha nefesh ba'atzma b'tmidius. Like the nefesh itself is always there. The nefesh is a life force. It's an energy force. In this case, a divine energy. But the midas of ava v'yira are not necessarily always there. El rak leprokim tispoil. It's only at times that this stimulation, this excitement, this arousal happens. Rak leprokim tispoil hanefesh b'yispilus ha'ava v'yira. You see, the brackets help understand it at times. So I spoil ava v'yira, that the nefesh is spoiled b'yispilus ava v'yira. That's only from time to time. The nefesh is always there, but it's not necessarily a guaranteed or given that all the time you have a love and reverence. Min ha-seichel v'asoga, from the seichel and asoga, again, chachma bina, from the conceiving and from the comprehension. Shazel bo mekoyach moker asmi. In order to give birth, you need to do something more than just contemplate. You need to come from the koyach moker asmi, what he called keser, or earlier emek tev, or Yechida, Mokra Atzmi di Yechida. Shenesen Keach b'Chachma Bina. So it has to reach and draw from Yechida, from the source that gives power and empowers Chachma Bina Lohelid b'Chinis Ispailu Zu, to give birth to this stimulation, to this arousal of the midas, the avavira, of love and reverence. So now he's added another point. In addition to the fact that there's different types of souls, he's explained he's added now that there's two stages. There's how the soul is in its personality and seichel, like he said before, the etzem mahusam kach. And then there's something, an additional element that draws from the root, Yechida, into Chachma Bina, that in turn causes the birthing of an actual midas, avaviyira. Again, this is the Mittler Rebbe's additions in explaining the whole idea of how Nefesh Elokis works. And we'll soon see how this all comes together and relevant to the topic at hand. Okay. Valkain. Nikra Bechinas Tul Dezu, the Midas Minasechel B'Shem Yetzer Tev. Remember, so he said before, so what he's really explaining is what the Alter Rebbe said, go back to the Alter Rebbe's Lashon. So there's all explanation of these words. Alter Rebbe on page 38b said like this. That the Iker Nefesh Hu HaSeichel, Ki Nefesh L'Gos Ikru Nefesh HaMaskeles, U'Mizbeinenes Tomid U'Maseges Beinein Sev Baruch Hu. Okay, so Nefesh Elokis, its entire mind is completely focused on Ein Sof. Ein Lo Haskola Acheres. Doesn't have any other interest, intelligent interest. V'amides, because I began the whole thing that every nefesh has mischalekes l'shnaim, shem seichel amidas. So here you see how the Mittler Rebbe is explaining these two parts. The midas ha'avavir ha'neldus min ha'seichel ha'sagzu ha'hin ha'nekroiz b'shem yetzer tev. That's called yetzer tev. So nefesh elokis is all 10 keiches, and primarily actually seichel, chabad. That's why the nefesh elokis resides in the mind. The yetzer tev is focuses primarily on the midas, the midas netzetev. So what would those 3 lines in Torah has been the basis of this whole explanation of the Mittler Rebbe. So when you see it in Torah, you see how he's developing it, and he's explaining that's Takat Tulda. So now he's going back to the words of the Alter Rebbe. That's why it's called Tulda Zu, the midas min ha-seichel, the midas from seichel. This birthing is called what? B'shem yetzer tev, like I just read. And he said before, yetzer from the word yitzira. B'bchinis yitzira dafke. Dafke in a form of yitzira, meaning that's what shapes it. So what shapes the midah of Ava is because the mind is coming from, is connected, this initial kiss, and its mind is connected to chesed. V'hu mashaneled have a netzer, and that's what gives birth and is shaped. B'bchinis hamokara atzmi, from the mokara atzmi from chesed, Yechida shu etzem hatev shenikra emek tev kanal. The mokara atzmi is etzem tev, is the etzem, like he said, it's an inyan atzmi in the core root, called the emek tev, the root, the emek, the depth. The emek is like a mayon, you say, like a spring of water. It's emek, and within the emek is within the depths, meaning here the source of it all, and that's called emek tev kanal. So what you have here basically explaining 3 steps. The keser, atzmi, the emek tev, the yechida, the mazel, is what is drawn into Chachma Bina. In this case, is drawn. Let's say the Chachma Bina is in the shape of chesed, but it's not necessarily going to give a midah. But in order to give birth, you draw from chesed, and then a midah is born, and the midah is the tulda that he's talking about, and that's called yetzer tev. So the yetzer tev is the midas of the nefesh elokis. And in those midas, there are different types. Now, he doesn't say that these differences start in Kesed or do they start in Chachma Bina Midas. The truth is, the real personality of the person comes out in Midas, when you see love or you see reverence. But he's explaining that's not in a vacuum. It's rooted, Yetzer Tev, Yetzira, and Heiloda from Chachma Bina, drawing from Kesed. That's what he said here. So he's giving us more of the dynamics. Any questions? And now, to drive this point home even more, he says, Avomasha nefesh ba'atzmo mehusa. This is how the nefesh manifests in midas, in actual emotions and feelings. But the way the nefesh itself, in its core and its essence, kamei ba'asogas alakus, as it is when it's comprehending the divine, before we talked about going into midas, loy nikri yitzira. In other words, he's explaining why the nefesh alakis is not, in the Moichin, is not called Yetzer Tov. Yetzer is only once it's already been shaped into actual midas. It's been given birth. It's a new state. In its source, it's not called Yetzer. Yitzira. B'bchinas tul de chadasha. Klal. Not called at all, because it's not in a type of a new birthing. The new birthing is exclusively reserved for the midas. Let's see how he explains this further. There's a parenthesis that goes till the end of the paragraph, so we'll do that now. That's what he just said. Be'emes, and in truth, Hari Omer Loshen B'riya v'Yitzira Gam b'Neshamas. In truth, he's saying the language B'riya. One second, let me just see something. I'm just looking at the footnote. They say anything? No. Okay. We find that the expression B'riya Yitzira is used on Neshamas. K'meshikosa v'yivra Hashem v'yotzer Hashem es Adam. So we know right in Bereishis he says that God created, and that's bara v'yivra, and then it says v'yotzer, he shaped it v'yotzer Hashem es Adam ki yadua. So what do you see from this? That B'riya Yitzira is used in general on the neshama, not just on midas. So it's not really a question, but it's a qualification. So he says, "V'hainu dafkal etzem hatev the b'chinas emek tev the yechida hanal." Let me just read it quickly myself because I'm not sure how to read this. 1 second. Okay, there's definitely a little complex little piece here. Let's read it. Let's see what can make heads or tails here of this. Okay. So I'm not sure what he means by Hainu Dafke. What's he referring to? When you say B'riya Yitzira, he says you say it on the Shamas. So he's saying Dafka al etzem hatev b'chinas emek tev yechida hanal. So what's Dafka al etzem hatev? The language B'riya Yitzira? Is that what he means to say? The truth is, he really wants to say the opposite. That B'riya Yitzira come more on the lower levels. Like when we say Ata barasa, Ata yitzarta, and he said earlier, Yechidas teherehi. So I'm thinking that there may be, I always want to be very careful. I don't want to suggest there's a word missing. But earlier, B'riya Yitzira is already as the neshama comes down in the lower levels. Not teherehi of Yechidim. But he says, so maybe he means to say that what I said before, that Yitzira is only on the Tulda, on the Midas, is not regarding that. So he's qualifying and saying, but we find B'riya and Yitzira also on the Shama. So he's saying that what he meant that's not on the Shama, he meant only Yechida is beyond B'riya Yitzira. It's a little deichik to read it that way, but that may be what he's saying. In other words, he began by saying that's why Dafka Yitzira is used Yetzer Tev K'nis Tulda Chadasha, but Nefesh Ba'atzma K'mei Basar Lo Nikri Yitzira. So what does he mean by that? He just said that we do find Yitzira by the Nefesh. So he's saying what he's referring to, I think that's pshat. The more I read it, that's correct. Now, what I just said earlier in the parentheses, that the neshama itself is not Yitzira, we're talking dafka and yechida. Dafka yechida, the etzem tev, emek tev the yechida, that you don't have the expression bria and yitzira. Rakshen is nechlokis, hemadreges, the benaran chai. Then when the neshama breaks down into 5 levels of nefesh ruach neshama chai chida, who bischalkas shala bikelim beguf, then it comes down and becomes in kelim in the guf, and that's why you could call it bria and yitzira. But meiche v'liba, so we know the different parts of the neshama, not yechida, come down to different parts in the mind and the heart. The mishkan and neshama b'meyach, neshama, the nefesh ruach neshama is in the meyach, like meichin. The ruach belev, and the ruach is belev in the heart, the emotions, and nefesh bekovet in the liver. Moyach leiv kovet is nefesh, is neshama, ruach, and nefesh. So then it's come down to the kelim. Well, the kach. Okay, 1 second. Okay. So basically, what he qualified here in the parentheses is a few things. That the yitzira is primarily in the midas, not in the nefesh itself. It says vayivra, vayotzar. So he says that's in the lower levels of the neshama, not in the yechida. And then as the neshama breaks into parts, it does go down into different sections, and there you could call it bria, yitzira, and so on. He doesn't say it explicitly, but generally speaking, often you say bria is meichin, is chabad, or actually bina mekanna b'krasaya, bina, and mides is in yitzira, zo mekanna b'yitzira, and the he or malchus is mekanna b'asiya. So you have all 3, chabad, chagas, and he, or nefesh, or neshama, ruach, nefesh, is in those words. But yechid is higher than that. And now he goes back to what he said earlier about midas. Well, lekach eina tul de hazez the spouse hamidas ba'av yiddish belov rak leprokim canal. And this explains what he said earlier. Remember, he said the neshama itself can contemplate and not necessarily you'll stimulate an emotion. So he says that's the reason that this told of spouse hamidas, which is the yetzer tev, is only at times, because it's a particular experience. The neshama is always there, he said. The neshama doesn't fluctuate, the general soul. But the midas is a particular section, a particular part of the experience, and that requires particular effort to give birth to midas, the yetzer tev. But the way the soul was above B'laf Araguf, where it does not come into these kelim of moyach leiv kovet. You have to say all the levels are certainly encompassed there. The ruach and neshama shein midas v'seichel. That ruach and neshama, which is midas v'seichel, are also encompassed in the neshama even before it comes down into a guf. Umuchrach leimer, and you have to say the ispilus hatmidis, that ongoing, consistent stimulation, excitement, arousal of midas, k'moy shehi b'tmidis k'moy hamalachim. That the neshamas above do have midas all the time, like it is by malachim. Okay, now that of course throws a whole new monkey wrench into this. We said before it's leprokim. So he's explained leprokim is only down when it comes below, where you have meichin and midas each in its location, but above there's no guf. If there's no guf, so the whole neshama, even though it does have levels of nefesh ruach neshama chayachid, but they're all encompassed together. And now he's saying, so therefore there's a spilus tmidius, like it is by the malachim. They're constantly in a state of ava v'yira, because they're not, in a human being, for example, we can't always be in a state of ava v'yira. You need to contemplate. But the neshamas there are not encumbered by the body and by the animal soul, so therefore everything shines. Meichin, midas. That's what it sounds like he's saying here, in this last piece in the parentheses. So I know there's a lot of different details there. This is, as I said, classic Mittler Rebbe, where it really gets you, throws you a good curveball. A lot of different pieces here, but I think I more or less organized it as I just explained it. But I'll stop here, and if anybody wants to ask anything. So just the best way to digest this is by separating, divide and conquer here, which means separate the pieces. Every piece has its own particular message, and not forget the general message that Nefesh Elikis is all about the divine. But he did break it down now into what midas are as opposed to seichel, and how it is neshamas lamata, neshamas lamayla. So we have a little more development of the ideas, which are all based, of course, on the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe and Torah. Okay, so this parenthesis ends. And he's finished with the Nefesh Elikis. The next is going to go to Nefesh Habamis, which we'll learn when I resume after I return next week. But any questions?
I'm going to have to listen to this class over again. So I will admit before I ask my question that I'm very confused. It's not your fault. But my question is, just to try and paraphrase this, is he saying that even though each neshama is rooted in a particular midah, nevertheless at the same time, the neshama manifests in different worlds in different ways. So therefore, each neshama can partake of different midos, even mochin. So it has different aspects to it, and that's how it manifests in different worlds. Ultimately, that brings it down here, and so the neshama can manifest in different ways. It's kind of like behiskalkus. It has a separated manifestation because it travels through different worlds. It's rooted in a place where, like the angels, well, he's saying, in contrast, the angels they reside in a place where it's not disintegrated, where all of the midos are sort of unified, and therefore it has, I don't know, that's where I start to get lost. But he's saying that the shama of a human being has these different parts because it's not in a higher world, whereas an angel has it all integrated together because it's not manifesting in a body where it gets sort of it manifests in different ways. Is that what he's saying?
He's not talking about angels here. He just gave angels as an example.
He's
talking about a neshama in a body and a neshama without a body. That's what he's comparing here.
Right, and with the body, the neshama manifests in different ways.
It's like anything. Look, the neshama has the power to see, but without eyes, the power to see does not manifest in physical vision. Down below, you need to open your eyes. You need to work on actualizing your faculties. For example, the power to throw something. So all those powers are there in the neshama. Without a guf, you don't have to go through any process, really. You do need avodah, and there's a mechin, and there's midas. And he just said midas. I'm not sure what part you're pointing. I'm assuming you're talking about the last piece, where he spoke about the difference between neshama beguf and neshama not in a guf. So just think about the difference between neshama. Think of electricity without appliance and electricity with an appliance.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah. But the main focus that he wants to really get to here is that the word Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Yetzira applies primarily to the midas that are born. And Yechida doesn't have Yetzer and Bria. The Neshama, higher levels of the soul, Nefesh Ruach Neshama does have an element of Bria Yetzira. That was the main point he wanted to make.
Okay.
I'm saying this to everybody.
Yeah.
And therefore, when it comes to Nefesh Elikis, the process, first it contemplates Chochmah Bina, and then it draws from Keser and gives birth to a Tulda Chadosha called the Yetzirah and Tulda of the Midas, and that's the Yetzer Tov, which is essentially the point of the Alter Rebbe in the Maimer. So what we come away with is understanding what the Nefesh Elikis is. Preoccupied exclusively with Elikus. As I said, and then he's going to continue now learning about the Nefesh Habamis, and then of course how they interact with each other. But we will stop here, end of the paragraph, page 365. Are there any other questions? Okay.